Welcome to this series on a book that's going to be reviewed called Falling Flat, A Refutation of Flat Earth Claims by Dr. Danny Faulkner, an astronomer associated with Answers in Genesis. And this is a fair critique for the purposes as stated on the screen just now, that we're going to analyze it, and given the character of the book is more polemic than apologetic, we're going to take a more polemical approach in this series. And if you don't know the difference, apologetics or defense is one thing, and then a polemic is an attack or a challenge to a position. Now, this book purports to refute Flat Earth claims, therefore it is a polemic. So that's the appropriate response, because we're not so much trying to defend Flat Earth as we are trying to deal with the claims of the book and the attitude of the book and its author and his habits. Now, what I'm showing on the screen is a collection of my notes as I went through the book, and I went through the electronic Kindle version. So it may or may not have page numbers that match a printed version or some other format. So we have to be sure that we're not making too many assumptions about where something is in the book. I'm not trying to hide anything. It's just the nature of how these things work in modern times. So, but the book is, it actually starts out with a very telling cover for the book, and it seems to me that my slide is not showing what I want it to show. I'm not sure why that is, but I think we can move on to the next one. There we are. And you can see right away that this book, the cover, pictures a disk in space with water pouring off the edges. Nobody believes that except perhaps the Flat Earth Society, which most flat earthers hold to be a controlled opposition organization. And they hold that gravity is caused by whatever gravity is. It's not a force, since Einstein holds things down by the Earth moving up. It's not a force either, but they determine that the Earth must be moving up through space. That's not what any, I would say, legitimate flat earthers believe. So this is, by the cover alone, you can tell that this is not an honest or typical appraisal of the flat Earth, the modern flat Earth movement. And this is inexcusable, we'll see in the book, because the author, Faulkner, attests to having spent a large number of years in the Flat Earth community, going to some of the conferences, etc., talking to the prominent names. Given that, there is no excuse. As Jesus said to the Pharisees, you claim to see, therefore you're guilty. You say you're not blind, so you'll be held to that standard of being able to see. So whenever we are undecided as to whether someone is acting out of ignorance or malice, in this case, by his own testimony, we must choose malice, because he claims to know and see, and we have to go with what he says. So, but the book has, it's not a really long book. In these page sizes will determine, on the device that you're looking at will determine how many pages there are. But it has 13 chapters. The first is about why he wrote it, so he's going to tell us his motives rather than us trying to guess. It's never good to guess someone else's motives. He'll talk about something called the Bedford Level Experiment and the Chicago skyline photo. Eclipses in chapter 3. Chapter 4 is something about aspects of the sky and the flat Earth. Chapter 5 is astronomy. Chapter 6, physics. Chapter 7, geocentrism. Chapter 8, NASA. And I presume since it's been over a year since I read this book, that it has other space agencies in mind. Chapter 9, miscellaneous claims about flat Earth. Chapter 10, how does the Bible teach flat Earth? And this is really, I think, where he should have started. Chapter 11, how did a domed flat Earth cosmology get imported into the Bible? That's a very loaded chapter title. Number 12, the Book of Enoch, and 13, his conclusions. So what I'm going to do is, I can't really just show my Kindle book on the screen. That might be some kind of copyright strike or whatever. So what I'm going to do instead is show you my notes, my highlights. What you do with a Kindle book, you can go through and highlight various things and make a note on it. I didn't always make a note on my highlights, but I can look at where my notes are in the book and give you some of the context. And again, not trying to hide anything or take anything out of context, but to simply try to be brief, as this will go, I don't know how many episodes to cover it all. So let's get started with chapter 1 about his motives. And we can see here on what I've got is page 7 in the electronic version about his motives. He starts off saying that beginning around 2012, there was this big resurgence in flat Earth, and much of this was started by Eric Dubé. Doesn't matter who he is. What matters is that he's claiming that much of this modern movement was started by Eric Dubé. But we'll see that in chapter 2, which we probably won't get to today, he'll say it was started mostly by someone named Joshua Nowicki, who took that Chicago skyline photo. So there's a bit of inconsistency in the content, the writing, and just to make that note. And then later in that same paragraph, and some of these paragraphs tend to be, it seems, quite long, at least in the electronic version, he mentions some prominent names. Mark Sargent, Darren Campanella, Robbie Davidson, and Rob Skiba, who has since passed away. And then he says that the last two are notable because they promote a Christian version of flat Earth based on their understanding of cosmology of the Bible. And nobody I know, even the Christians, would hold up any of these names as particularly authoritative or leaders. There really aren't leaders. There are people with louder voices than others. You'll find that in any group of people. But there is no slavish following or writing the sayings of anyone in this flat Earth movement, just to make that point. So then later on the same page, I have this quote that he says, flat earthers often remark there are no atheists in their rank. So I suppose that's because the flat Earth model is so contrived no one would seriously suggest it evolve. That's a false premise that there are no atheists in the flat Earth movement. Whether it's just said by some flat earthers or not is immaterial. This is the impression being given to the reader, who more than likely will not hang around with flat earthers and is just going by what the book tells them about them. And this is always a word of caution, because when somebody tells you about a third party and argues both sides of the case, you can't be very confident that you're hearing both sides accurately. So the point here is that this is not a necessarily common view in the flat Earth community, but to make the snarky comment after that, in an attempt to be comical, I suppose, that nobody could believe flat Earth idea evolved. This is also ironic, not just bad comedy, but ironic from a young Earth creationist, as Mr. Faulkner is, because for many long years, if someone wanted to insult a young Earth creationist, they would say, you probably believe in flat Earth too. So here he is doing the same thing to others. And this is not what Jesus meant when he said, do unto others they would have you do to you, because Faulkner is obviously not following this here. He's doing what he did not want done to him, to others. It reminds me of a parable of Jesus where he told of the servant who was forgiven a large debt and then went out and shook down friends and family and neighbors for a much smaller amount. So in the same way, when a young Earth creationist attacks a flat earther or as a representative of one view or another, attacks the flat Earth community or the flat Earth so-called model, this is a double standard. There's nothing else to call it. And as far as anyone can tell, there is no such thing as a flat Earth model. It's simply saying Earth is not a ball in space. That's all that flat Earth is saying. It doesn't say that it's absolutely smooth, like the face of a mirror or anything like that, that there is no topography, that there aren't mountains and valleys, that the waves of the sea don't churn. We're not, nothing like that is going to be found in flat Earth literature, if you can call that on either side. But the point is, when in this debate, in this context, and context is important, it's vital, to say flat Earth is to say, no, it's not a sphere or a ball. And we have to be careful about the term round. Both sides believe, well, at least some on the flat Earth side believe the Earth is round, as opposed to a square or a rectangle or a diamond or anything, like that. So in the context of this debate or this topic, flat Earth simply means not a sphere. It also does not mean a concave Earth, which some people believe. That's not what this is about at all. And we'll find out later about confusion over whether or not it's true that flat earthers don't know the difference between flat Earth and just geocentrism, because there are geocentrists today who believe that the Earth is a ball in space, but that everything revolves around it, as was another common idea in history as well. So it is not becoming of someone with a PhD and a long career to be so snarky about this, especially when it opens his young Earth creationist model to the same kind of criticism. And then later he says that he sees flat Earth movement as a great threat to true Christianity today. This is motivation by fear. He is afraid that people will mock Christianity or leave the faith if Earth is flat. There is no evidence to back either of those claims. And in fact, again, as a young Earth creationist, you would think that he would know that young Earth creationism is an object of mockery by atheists and evolutionists and old Earth creationists. There are Christians, such as Reason to Believe organization with Hugh Ross, who mock young Earth creationists. They believe in evolution. They believe that creationism as a young Earth creationism is an affront to God. It is badly reading the Bible, and that young Earth creationists are being hyper-literal when they shouldn't be. So it again is ironic, to use a kind term, that anyone would be afraid of the reputation of Christianity on the basis of flat Earth, when in fact this is already an issue for Christians who are young Earth creationists, when there are old Earth creationist Christians who think as young Earth creationists do against flat Earth. So there's no point being made here. He hopes to provide answers for people when they're confronted with arguments that Earth is flat. But I was greatly disappointed after having finished the book that no such answers were forthcoming. And in the years since this book was published, I have yet to run into anyone who uses it in their arguments. He goes on to say that February 2016 is when he first learned of flat Earth, and he, or at least the modern movement of it, he says he has conducted an extensive study of this, what he calls a phenomenon, and then he has read numerous books on the subject and read material online and watched many videos. And one must ask themselves, why a PhD in astronomy, working for answers in Genesis, would be spending this kind of time and effort and years and just constantly sitting in a flat Earth Discord server to gather material for books and articles. Why would anyone do that? Now, I'm not going to guess what his motives are. We could say something about trolls on the internet, But again, this is unbecoming of a PhD in astronomy. And I've often remarked in any live chats and YouTubes, for example, that real PhDs don't typically hang out there, much less troll anybody or have, even as a background noise, to listen to either live streams or Discord chats or whatever it is. If you have this in the background, you're not really paying attention. So this is not a good idea any way you look at it. He goes on to say that he attended the first International Flat Earth Conference in 2017 and one in 2018. I and a lot of other people have never been to any such conferences. So that is really disturbing that he would put that kind of effort into it. Anyway, and risk his reputation, which I guess when you go back to the issue of young Earth creationists not having a good reputation anyway, and they go so out of their way to prove what scientists they are by trying to please the world's so-called science, and they're yet willing to stand up against the evolutionists. It's an inconsistent position, in my opinion. Now, he talks about why he uses the term flat earthers, and it's really not a big major point. I honestly don't care why anybody uses the term. In the context of earth-shaped debate, that's fine. But again, it is often used as a pejorative, as is creationist or young earther or Christian a lot of times. Christian began as a pejorative. Anyway, we're just going to make notes or we'll never get through this. He says that cosmology is the study of the structure of the universe, which nobody disputes what cosmology is defined as, but then he goes on to say that the sun is a star, and that's standard cosmology. But the Bible does not call it a star. For someone who, as I've said before, when we read Genesis 1 and take it literally on the age of the earth, as young earth creationists like Faulkner do, why do they take that same chapter in the Bible when it comes to the structure of the earth or the quote-unquote universe? Suddenly the Bible cannot be taken literally, and that we, or flat earthers who don't agree with the cosmology of Answers in Genesis, we point out that this is inconsistent, because how can you turn around and call flat earthers hyper-literal in the same passage of Scripture that you take hyper-literally in regards to age? This is inconsistent, it's illogical. It's also called a special pleading fallacy to say that in this one little isolated case, we can't be literal. But right there, weaved in the, between each other in the text about structure and age, the weavy part that we like is to be taken literally. So the Bible does not call the sun a star. It says God made two lights, a greater light and a lesser light. One's the sun, we call it, whatever language throughout history, it's the sun. And the moon is the lesser light. And he made the stars also. The stars are not given a lot of attention, but they're called stars. The sun and moon, the sun is not called a star. It's a luminary. They're all luminaries, lights in the sky, but the Bible does not call the sun a star. And this is from a young earth creationist, a Christian. So that's why it's important to point this out. And then he talks about the other stars. Well, that presumes that the sun is a star in the first place, which isn't established, biblically especially. When you have a cosmology that any atheist and evolutionist is comfortable with, you should have red flags popping up. And yet they go out of their way, as I said, to be sciencey and please the world when it comes to cosmology, but not when it comes to age. Anyway, he says that if the sun is a star, at least he put the if there in the book, then why do the other stars appear so faint? It's because the other stars are incredibly far away. And this is another logical error, because, first of all, it's a non sequitur. It does not follow that this must be the only answer. The stars could be small and near. But again, it's not another star, the sun isn't. And then he says that light diminishes with the inverse square of the distance. That's true. But again, that doesn't prove what shape the Earth is. Now, he says, and we're down to page 9 now. I'm not going to really try hard to keep track of the page numbers because that's not helpful depending on the format. But he says that in flat Earth cosmology, the Earth is flat and round. Not everyone in the flat Earth community would say that it's round. Many don't claim any shape at all, just as opposed to a ball. That's it. The surface we walk on and sail on is flat. It is measured flat. It's, yes, it has topography, as I mentioned, but we don't say it's necessarily round. Okay, everybody doesn't say the same thing regarding that. The basic teaching, if you will, or conclusion is that we walk and sail on a flat surface, and that's all. And we believe the Bible says there's a firmament, but what shape the firmament is or what it's actually composed of, nobody knows. We'll get it more into that later, but the point is that Faulkner is making an assumption here and putting words in the mouths of flat earthers that they haven't said, at least not as any kind of official position, which there isn't anyway. So it's a false premise. The surface is flat, and you will find in the writings of Dr. Michael Heiser, who passed away recently also, who was an expert in Semitic languages and ancient Near East culture, that when you see, while the Bible portrays, I think it's Biblios or some organization like that, where he was a contributor, and he is responsible for the image, which I may or may not be able to put up on the recording later, of a world that the Bible depicts as kind of like a bubble in space, in water, not space, but water, because as it says in 2 Peter, God created the world out of water and by water, and that inside this bubble, in this vast amount of water, bisected, so there's a top half and a bottom half, and we walk on the surface of the bottom half. Beneath is the underworld, under the oceans, and above us is the sky and then the abode of God. And so, but again, we don't say exactly what the shape is, whether it's really a bubble, we don't know. We just know where we are, where we live. And he says in the book, the North Pole is at the center. I believe I have a picture here, if I could remember to put this back on the screen. That's not the picture I wanted next. I think I wanted this one. The United Nations logo depicts what's called an azimuthal equidistant map. Why the UN uses that in a logo, we could speculate forever, but the point is that the north, so-called pole, is in the center. Now, the only reason we can call it a pole is basically because of magnetics. Magnets always have a North Pole and a South Pole. So we know there's a magnetic North Pole. But the point of debate would not say, we can't say yet whether there's an axis or spins on it, that this is also a pole. And at the end that points toward Polaris is necessarily the North Pole. But that's what we call it. We do know that Polaris is 90 degrees over the center of what you can see here on this map. So that's just to give some illustration of what he's saying here. I'm going to go back a little bit and we'll show that other image shortly. But the point in the book is that just to make sure we know what he's talking about when he says what he thinks flat earthers are talking about. And then he says that the edge of the explored Earth consists of an ice wall that we call Antarctica. Not all flat earthers say that. So he's misrepresenting or oversimplifying the so-called flat Earth community. It is not a cohesive unit, in which in other writings he has declared flat Earth a cult. I have a reference to that under the description of this video. But in a cult, one of the characteristics is that you have a central authority, and that everybody believes the same things that the authority teaches, and that's not the case with flat earthers at all. So these are just so sayings. These are claims that are unsupported. Just to let you know, again, the dangers of listening to someone trying to argue both sides of a debate by themselves. And then he says, above the earth is a dome in which the stars are embedded. Again, not all believe this in the flat earth community, or whether stars are necessarily embedded in it. Now, Genesis 1 says that the sun, moon, and stars are in the firmament. You can take that two ways. In might be in, within, or contained by, such that the sun, moon, and stars are under the firmament, but it can also mean inside the firmament. Now, the firmament doesn't have to be an opaque, solid object as we understand it. It's a miraculously created realm. So we can't get a sample of the firmament to say what it is or isn't. All we know is what Genesis tells us, which is that the sun, moon, and stars are in the firmament. That's how it reads. Okay? Now, when people try to mock this idea, they say, well, does it roll around? Does it rotate? What does it do? Nobody knows. The Bible doesn't say, and nobody's been up there to sample it. So he should be careful, especially a PhD, be more careful about unsubstantiated claims and burning a straw man, which is another logical fallacy where you set up an argument your opponent in the debate has not made and then burn it down just because it's easy to do so and it impresses the audience of the debate. And he mocks this idea by saying, again, that the dome spins. Nobody in the flat earth community has ever said that I know of, and that this is what causes the stars to move. Nobody has said what causes the stars to move other than God does it. And it's the same question we could ask in standard cosmology, which Mr. Faulkner believes, because what causes the Earth to move through space? What causes it to spin? Is that just God winding it up and we just have to believe that? That this is why the stars move above our heads, because Earth is really moving? It was Einstein, I'm pretty sure, who said that you can't tell which is moving from our perspective, whether it's the Earth spinning or everything else spinning around the Earth. He says mathematically you can't tell, which we should be careful to point out that mathematics is not science. It's a language, just like words are a language, or in any given language. Math is a tool. It's how you use a way to describe things. And it does not have to be grounded in reality. That's not to say it's useless and you can't do practical things with it. Yes, you certainly can. You can build things with it. It's a way of examining the universe that God made. And by universe, I don't necessarily mean what standard cosmology does. It's just our realm. And it's a common term. But nobody knows what causes the Earth to hurtle through space, hurling around the sun and at a kind of a corkscrew. I'm sure you've seen that image. Nobody knows why that happens. There are laws of nature that are simply observations that are always true, and nobody tries to explain them. Nobody tries to say, why is entropy a law? A universal physical law. Of a law of nature. Nobody tries to explain that because it's just an observation of the way things are. We could say the same thing for Earth motion or sun, moon, and star motion. We're all in the same boat here on this point. But he's presenting these things as if all flat earthers believe them, and this is not the case. He goes on to say that the sun and moon merely appear to rise and set due to perspectives, and he emphasizes the word appear. He puts it in italics. In his cosmology, they actually do set by the Earth turning away from them. They rise when the Earth turns toward, and as they pass overhead and disappear again, that's sunset. And nobody denies that there's such a thing as phenomenological language, but The point is, in this context, why this is happening, why they appear and disappear, the sun and moon. And we don't necessarily say it's always perspective. What we do say is because of the limits of optics, especially when you're looking along the surface of the Earth for a very long distance, a lot of things can get in the way, even if it's just the air. There's a lot of fluctuations in the air, and it becomes opaque after a distance. Even if you have a powerful telescope, there's a point at which you just can't see through anymore. There's too much stuff in the way, even if it's just air molecules, because there are clouds. And clouds form around, the droplets form around particulate matter that's suspended in the air. So those things get in the way, even if there were no topographical features such as mountains or anything else, or waves of the sea that can get in the way of boats. So this is not proving anything about Earth shape. Okay, so now he brings up the issue of geocentrism, and he makes the statement that we can all agree with, that all flat earthers are geocentrists, but not all geocentrists are flat earthers. And he's under the impression in this book that flat earthers, at least most of them, don't know the difference, and they think that if you're a geocentrist, you must be a flat earther. Although geocentrism with a ball earth raises another set of problems, I'm not sure that he can make this statement against very many in the flat earth community at all. He says that there is it's only a resurging, it seems, from the flat earth community. I don't think that's true. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. If you look up Robert Sungenis, he is a geocentrist with ball earth. So, again, these are claims that are made without actually data showing how this is established as a fact. He goes on to say that, describing what geocentrism is, and he makes an interesting statement. He says they subscribe to Tychonic cosmology, that is by Tycho Brahe, I'm assuming he means, where other planets, which again assumes Earth is a planet, but other planets orbit the sun, but the sun orbits the Earth, carrying the other planets with it. So he says this amounts to a coordinate transformation from the sun to the Earth. Newtonian gravity explains the orbits of the Earth and other planets, but thanks to the coordinate transformation, the Earth does not move. No matter who would be making this argument, it would be fallacious, because all it's saying is that if you do the right math, you can make pretty much any system work, any idea, or people like the term model. We're not going to be hyper-specific about models because there's a lot of terms that are being thrown around that aren't really very accurate, such as the word science or physics for that matter. But if there's a coordinate transformation, this is mathematical. And Newtonian gravity is kind of a misnomer all its own, because Newton did not want to be associated with any theory of gravity if you read his writings. But that's what people believe. But he says, thanks to the coordinate transformation, the Earth does not move. But everybody does this. I mean, whether you're a geocentrist or a heliocentrist, you're invoking a mathematical model to make things work, and math does not have to be reality. It is descriptive language. And he says that this transformation is geocentrism by definition. The Earth moves in some sense in geocentrism, he says, but since space is attached to the Earth, what? And the Earth is at rest with respect to itself. What? The Earth is at rest with respect to space. This is some pretty convoluted, I hesitate to call it reasoning, because it's a house of cards. If one thing, the card on the bottom isn't true, isn't set, then you can't put any cards on top of it. They're trying, but he goes on, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because this is supposed to be about flat earthers, not just geocentrists. And he says flat earthers don't have much in common with the Tychonic geocentrists, but flat earthers heavily borrow from the Tychonic geocentrist arguments. There's no support for this claim that I could find. It's just an assertion. Okay, and then he goes on to say that he's found that flat earthers frequently conflate the question of the Earth's shape with the question of whether the Earth moves. I'm not sure flat earthers are the ones doing this. I think it's what we call ball earthers trying to pretend that they are arguing as a flat earther and coming up with these conclusions on their own, because everybody in the flat earth community that I've ever met knows the difference. And many say, we insist that there is no shape being claimed. As I've explained before, flat is just in the context of not a ball. That's all it means. It doesn't mean without topography, and it doesn't have any statement as to shape. And as I also explained before, according to the Bible, we walk on the flat surface of this realm that God created, and there are waters above and waters below. And so I'm not sure who it is who's conflating this, and they're not named, although Faulkner will name other people. He has named people so far. But these people who believe, who get these things confused aren't named. And then later on, he says that they do so by confusing the history of Western cosmology on this matter, and by giving stock geocentric arguments, mistakenly thinking that the arguments also prove that the Earth is flat. This, as I've gotten my notes here, this previous unsupported claim is hastily concluded, also without citation, to be caused by confusing history and parroting arguments, leading to faulty conclusions. So, and again, this is a very Western-centric book. It does not address anything outside of basically the Western world, even if it's ancient. I'm not sure that he, as I've said, it's been a year since I read this book. I'm not sure that he mentions the Chinese or anyone of the Incas or any of these other civilizations. So by confining it to Western cosmology, this is cherry picking on a grand scale. And so let's just leave that for the time being and go on in the notes here on to page 12 of my copy. And he says, the question of Earth's true shape had been settled since 2 millennia before Columbus. This is also an unsupported claim. He will have a footnote, perhaps, but not right now. And the point is that it's never been settled. Who would you ask to say it's been settled? Who settled it? And how many people were involved in this settling? Were they chosen by popular vote? Did they declare themselves experts? Who settled it 2,000 years ago? Who are these people who settled it? Why is it claimed that it's been settled? By whom? When? How many people? These are questions we need to ask. And then another statement on page 12 is, most people long ago entered a complacent state of taking someone else's word for the matter. Well, here is Faulkner advising everyone to take someone else's word on anything they have no personal expertise about. We're supposed to take other people's words because of their credentials or their popularity or alleged experiments. And you have to be careful how you define that term experiment. Some people think that if you swirl water one way on one side of the equator and then it goes another way on the other side, that this is some kind of experiment or evidence or proof. And it's nothing of the sort. But people do get complacent and they want other people to tell them what's true because they don't want to do the work themselves, and everybody can't do all the work or we'd never make any progress. But the point is that the people who do the work need to be trustworthy. And peer review is overrated because it often becomes an echo chamber where you're reviewed more on the matter of who likes your opinion than on rigorous scientific standards. And the general public is not even allowed to really get into these discussions. Sometimes they take votes from what I've read in this peer review process. And so when you have no access to some of these discussions and then you declare yourself experts and that the matter has been settled, most people don't have any say in that. And this, in turn, is a description of what we could call a Gnostic kind of a system, where adepts, scientists, have special knowledge that you have to go through years of training to get, and the common people are left in the dark, and that's the way they like it. It is a Gnostic system. It is like Gnosticism. You must be in the know, and if you're not in the know, in the group, then you have to take their word for it, the words of the adepts or the scientists in their white lab coats. So this advice is good advice if only everyone who gives us advice would also take it. Now, he says that he thought of something first here, and I read in the book, it says, when cornered on this matter, people generally respond with the observation that we have photos from space that clearly show a spherical Earth. However, flat earthers, he has a typo here, the flat earther, never mind, my vision's not so good today, almost certainly will respond that such photos can easily be faked. And he says, but note that I thought of this first. I don't think he can support that claim. Can anyone really say, I'm the one who first thought that photos can be faked? I'm pretty sure photos have been doctored for a couple generations, way before computers, before Faulkner was born. This went on. I'm pretty sure he's not the first person to think of this. And then he revisits Columbus, and he says that perhaps the rise of the flat earth movement is a symptom of a deeper problem. First, you have to establish that it's a symptom of anything. A symptom presupposes that there's something wrong with it. This is begging the question. It's a fallacy. Then he also says this also explains why it's so easy for flat earth arguments to fluster many people. He presumes that people are poorly educated, and this is why they can't refute flat earth. But isn't there another possibility? Yes, a real scientist would entertain of such a possibility that maybe flat earth arguments aren't so bad. You can't just rule that out. A good scientist will find ways to falsify their theory and not simply hand-wave dismiss them. So again, we need to make sure that we ask the right questions. It's a movie line from iRobot. You must ask the right questions. And this is important in any kind of investigation. But you can't have someone else ask the questions for you, because in this case, we're seeing that not the right questions are being asked, if they're being asked at all. So, and then he says, in the West, again, emphasizing the West, for 2,000 years before Columbus, nearly everyone had known that the Earth was spherical. How can anyone make that claim? 2,000 years before Columbus, how do you even make that claim? And then he says, going on to page 14, he talks about Columbus and voyages and things, and he says, therefore, a voyage across a large unknown ocean was a frightening thing, but not because of fear of falling off an edge. Except for the fake Flat Earth Society, nobody thinks there's an edge to fall off of. If we are contained in basically what you could call a bathysphere, a sphere that is sunk deep into the ocean, and we are in the deep. I mean, there's water above and water below, according to the Bible, which any Christian should accept as that's what the Bible says. You would know that there's no edge. You're not going to fall off of the bathysphere, even if you just sit on, again, bisecting this hollow sphere, which is what a bubble is, and you're living on the top half of that in your giant Earth bathysphere. How would you fall off? It's contained. There's water everywhere outside of you. There's nothing to fall off of. And that's why, I remarked about the image on the front of his book cover, that it pictures something which is a straw man argument. Most flat earthers, almost all, believe that there is no edge to fall off of. And then he says later on that people 5 centuries ago knew the Earth's circumference. How would he say that most people knew? And didn't he say that people shouldn't just accept what they're told? This is an appeal to popularity. Now, he's going to come back to that a little bit, but then he goes under the title of Confusing Heliocentrism and a Spherical Earth, which we've already mentioned. We're not sure who is exactly doing the confusing. He says flat earthers constantly conflate this mythology about Columbus with the Galileo affair. What in the world? I mean, he's speaking in such vague generalities, sweeping generalization fallacy, that there's really nothing to quote-unquote attack in this book because there's nothing stated that's of any substance. And he talks about Copernicus and all sorts of things. You have to read the book to get more of that context, but we're going to go on to the next little quote here. He says, because if the heliocentric model were true, it would overturn the Ptolemaic model, which had been the dominant cosmology for 15 centuries. Ironically, this same zealous defense of the current thing is the purpose of this book that we're analyzing. It is a defense of the current thing. How can someone writing such a book in defense of the current thing chastise people in history for doing the same thing? This is getting into alleged motives, which unless they're stated, they must be alleged. And we know that Faulkner has stated his motivations for writing the book and his fears of what this might do to Christianity. But when he talks about these generalities of other people's motives, again, what do we have to attack because there's nothing of substance being stated? Then later on this page 15, Galileo subtly called anyone who disagreed with him a fool. And note in this book that Faulkner, not so subtly, treats flat earthers the same, and it will get worse as the book goes on. It starts out in an attempt to be somewhat ironic, rather than ironic, although it managed to do both at the same time, but it will get more trollish and decidedly uncivilized as the book goes on. But you can decide that for yourself. This is my opinion, and that's all I'm giving. So then we're going on to the next page here on page 16, and he says, I can't begin to count the times I've heard flat earthers blame Copernicus for introducing the spherical Earth. This again is anecdotal evidence, false accusation, and sweeping generalization, all in 2 sentences. Who cares? Why do we need to know who to blame for anything? I don't care which side is trying to find blame or determine motives by some sort of divination that they're claiming. I don't know how they can claim to know someone else's motives unless they're stated. But what does it matter whose fault it is that this debate exists? It doesn't matter. You're not going to change the past. But then he says their ignorance of the history of cosmology is appalling. I don't think he knows who he's talking to when he says they. He is talking about flat earthers, not naming them, and saying that they're all ignorant of cosmology. Again, by cherry-picking only Western cosmology, he thinks he's making a valid argument against flat earthers. And this is, again, his polemic against flat earthers. But he can't lump all of them into a box as much as he'd like to. And if he's heard all these blaming, so what? So what? It doesn't matter, and it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not people are ignorant of the history of cosmology and whether they have also considered other parts of the world's cosmology besides Greek and Roman. And then he says the only answer, he has somehow excluded all others, is that there must be a vast conspiracy behind the spherical Earth. He thinks that this is flat earthers' conclusion and that they have somehow eliminated all other possibilities. This saying the only answer is also the same question as why would they lie? That's a motive question. And in any kind of investigation into motives, if that were the topic, you would have to look at follow the money, for example. People say, follow the money. People make jokes about black ops budgets and how those things get funded by, cover stories, basically, in any national government. There are black budgets, and you say that there's no such thing as a conspiracy, or that we should say that there's no motivation for people to lie. What about evolution, Mr. Faulkner? Why would so many people, believe in evolution? Wouldn't you say there's a conspiracy to push that in all the public schools and all the media and all entertainment and on the news? Everything pushes evolution, and they laugh at people who don't believe in it. And so if that's the case with evolution, then why would he even ask this question of flat earthers? Why is this a problem only for flat earthers? And then he says on the next page, to the Christian flat earthers, belief in the spherical earth is a strong delusion. All of them? This is an unsupported claim and a generalization, a sweeping generalization, because I, for one, I don't believe that 2 Thessalonians 2:11 says that ball earth is the strong delusion. If you look at the context, and every context that talks about the end times, you will see that the delusion is from God to those who hate the truth that would save them. So it cannot be something that Christians believe. God is not going to deceive his own people, and it's not going to be something that they would that would apply to Christians as well as non-Christians. Christians and non-Christians believe in ball earth, heliocentrism. There are Christians and non-Christians who believe in flat earth, or geocentrism, or whatever else, hollow earth theories there are. But to say that this is the strong delusion is ignorant of the Bible. So again, though, this is not a problem just for flat earthers, because you can find any number of things the ball earthers believe are the strong delusion. They may call flat earth a strong delusion. Whether they do or not, I don't know. I'm not making that claim. But neither is the claim that flat earthers, all or even a majority believe this, supported. So be careful when you try to cherry pick a verse, no matter which side of this particular debate you're on. Yes, there are flat earthers who make mistakes. There are Christians who make mistakes all the time. There's a lot of debate in Christianity about theological things only that have nothing to do with cosmology. And people will make outrageous claims about those who disagree with them, especially in my experience, Calvinists, which is the dominant belief at Answers in Genesis, is Calvinism. I have strong opposition to Calvinism. And so I wouldn't be surprised, and I've heard worse, to be told that I am victim of the strong delusion here. But again, that's not what it talks about. God is not deceiving his own people. So anyway, then he goes on here to say the claim is that belief that the earth is spherical ultimately led to belief in evolution. This is backwards. Most would say that evolution led to sphere Earth, and it did. Well, look at the Big Bang and look at all the other, the basis of cosmology as it's popularly believed by Faulkner and others. The vast majority of people in the world, this is a belief that any atheist and evolutionist can get behind. Standard cosmology is okay with them because they believe this is part of evolution, that these things happened over billions of years. Regardless of if you reject the timeline, you're still taking everything else from evolutionary-based theory. That's what modern cosmology is. It's evolutionary. It's their creation story, the Big Bang. And that's why how they understand what they're looking at in the sky. And Answers in Genesis and a lot of other people look at the same stuff and say, yeah, that's right. They're agreeing with atheists and evolutionists when they do this. It's the basis of modern astronomy. Now you can come up with cover stories and alternate things, such as I've heard the white hole theory from Dr. Humphreys, also associated with Answers in Genesis. It was an interesting theory at the time. I had several copies of his book, Starlight and Time, and about expansion and contraction and all these things. Still, ultimately, evolutionary theory. It's just like the Protestant Reformation, which Calvinists are all behind, right, was an attempt to reform the Catholic Church, not to revolt against it. That's what happened. But they had an intention of just reforming it. They didn't really disagree about a lot of things they should have disagreed about at the time. So anyway, it's not all so cut and dried about who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side. There's a lot of trading of misconceptions among people because people are fallible human beings. But again, this is backwards, the statement. I don't care who says it or how many say it, but it's evolution that is the basis of modern heliocentrism. So now let's go on. We'll do one more page here in this video. He talks about ancient Near East cosmology, and he says, it is reason the Bible teaches the earth is flat. I'll take that up later. And for a book that's supposed to be centered on Christians, he takes it up really later in the book. That should have been, I think, the first thing. If we're appealing to Christians, you would start with the Bible, I would think. But that seems more of an afterthought as far as where it is in these chapters. But he says he'll mention two problems right now. First, there was no single ancient Near East cosmology, so how could the Bible reflect it? I don't know who's saying there is the ancient Near East cosmology or one ancient Near East cosmology. It's not a flat earth belief. It's in everybody's belief of what various ancient Near East cultures believed. And why are we only looking at ancient Near East? Again, this is cherry picking because it's a narrow view of history and cosmology history. So I don't know what point he's trying to make here because as we all agree, there isn't just one single ancient Near East cosmology. There are similarities among them, of course. But why should the Bible reflect it? Anyway, that's a question for another day. But he said, secondly, this belief undermines the inspiration and authority of the Bible, of Scripture. I don't know how it does. Because what does anything a flat earther said do to undermine the Bible? If anything, it's more supportive of the Bible. And again, we get into who's being more literal or more literal than thou again, with Genesis 1. Interweaved in the text are statements about time and statements about construction. And to take only the time ones as literal and not the construction ones, and then also to add insult to injury, turn around and point a finger at the ones who want to take it all literally in the same context and say, what fools you are. This is just, at the very least, unchristian and unprofessional, in my opinion. He says later on the page, by the 4th century BC, heavenly spheres concentric with the earth had become an integral part of cosmology in the West, and will remain so for 2,000 years. This is not explained here why the structure of the earth must be a sphere. Or why the structure of the heavens means earth is a sphere. You can be on a flat plane and have something turn all around you. They do this all the time in a virtual sense in any sort of, the word just escaped me, stellarium. When you go to look at the stars in a planetarium, you sit in chairs on a flat floor, and there's a dome ceiling all around you, and they run stars around down there, and it all works with you sitting still and the stars moving over your head. So why would you have to be sitting on a sphere for that to work? They obviously know you don't. You don't have to be. You can sit on a perfectly flat floor and a dome around you, and not have any problem understanding or relating to the movements of the heavenly luminaries that you can see going outside your house and looking up. So that it just doesn't follow. Just like saying, why do you look at the ceiling lights to see the shape of the floor? You might as well say that if you have a billiard table, since all the balls are round, then the table must be round. This is a stupid argument. And I think I'll go ahead and just stop here because that's where my notes are. It stops in the middle of a page. But I think this is enough time for one video, and we'll pick this up in the next one. Not sure when that will be, but we'll worry about that some other time. So thanks for listening.